to all of you for joining this afternoon's educational webinar. I'm Danielle McCulloch with FwinTech, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Stop Reacting, Start Proacting, Laying the Foundation for Strategic Technology Marketing. Today, I'll also be joined by my colleague, Dave Wasby, who you'll meet in just a moment. I've been involved with the evaluation of technologies in one form or another for over 15 years, and I've worked in areas ranging from industrial manufacturing to high-tech medical devices. I've also worked in a variety of functions related to new product development, process engineering, product launch, and marketing. In addition to evaluating and marketing new technologies, one of my key roles here at FwinTech is training both our internal staff and clients on the fundamentals of technology transfer. The tips and tricks I'll be sharing with you today come from my firsthand experience of analyzing technologies and then preparing to effectively commercialize them. I'll now let Dave tell you a little bit about himself.
Thanks, Danielle. I've been involved with innovation, new product development, and marketing for over 20 years, primarily in telecom and other high-tech industries. For the past several years, I've been focusing on mobile commerce and user interface development, both online and in a mobile environment. Here at FwinTech, I have experienced screening, assessing, and marketing a range of technologies for our clients. So my comments today will flow from firsthand experience reviewing technologies, recommending to our clients which ones possess the potential to move forward, and then working on marketing efforts towards the goal of licensing or partnership investment.
Thanks, Dave. Before you engage in any type of analysis or evaluation, it's critically important that you understand the perspective of the people and the organizations that you will be dealing with. Communication is essential throughout this process, and it's most effective when you understand and appreciate the differing perspectives of the players involved. If you're working in the tech transfer office of a research-type organization, which most of you are, your goal is to identify valuable innovations and make them available to the public. This demonstrates the positive impact that your organization can have on the public, and it also helps generate additional revenue for your organization. In contrast, corporations are looking for new revenue streams, ways to decrease costs, or options that enable them to differentiate themselves from their competitors. This means that as tech transfer professionals, we must understand that what is important to these corporations, since they are your potential licensees. Thinking about their goals will help you identify technologies within your portfolio that might be attractive and help market them in a manner that will be compelling to your target audience. The process we outlined today is a critical piece that enables you to do this effectively. It's likely that many of you are dealing with a large number of technologies, which can clearly be somewhat overwhelming. To proactively manage your invention portfolio, you need to be able to quickly identify those technologies with the best potential for success. The more times that you touch a technology, the more it costs you in terms of resources, both time and money. So the goal is to clear the decks of technologies with lower potential so that you can use your precious limited resources for those that are most likely to generate a license or partnership. At FwinTech, we like to use a sorting or a funnel type of process. As you can see at the top, we have a mixed bag of technologies that's loaded into the screening step, which helps you rapidly determine which technologies warrant more investigation. And this is the step that we actually covered in a previous webinar called a step-by-step process for technology screening. And this is also available on our website. Those technologies that make it through the screening process with the highest potential of commercialization then move on to the market-based assessment phase. This is performed to gather further insight on the market's interest in the technology. Then only the technologies that are most likely to succeed are marketed, as this step of the process typically requires heavy resource commitment and thus cannot be done for every technology. As you can see off to the right in this diagram, there are two options for technologies with lower potential. You can market them passively, or you can release them, which means to return them to the inventor or to abandon IP protection. At FwinTech, we feel it's really important to follow each step of this process in order. Not only do you sort the technologies with low commercialization potential from those with high potential, but you also gain invaluable insight from each phase, enabling you to put together more effective and efficient marketing plans for those technologies for which you pursue commercialization. Today, we're going to focus on the market-based assessment phase. This is where you focus only on those technologies that made it through the first phase of screening and warrant additional resources to more definitively determine commercialization potential and identify potential licensees. We find that technology transfer professionals often are just itching to pick up the phone and start calling people to tell them about a novel innovation that seems like it really might have potential. Each of you is faced with a variety of pressures, including generating royalty revenue, kicking off startups, signing joint research agreements, etc. And as a result, it's really tempting to move right from screening to marketing, especially for those technologies that do seem like they have that potential. However, we found that not only is this relatively inefficient, but you also miss out on key opportunities to increase your chances of success. Remember, the goal is to get more deals and ideally better deals. The analysis at this market-based assessment phase is more than just go, no-go activity. You're proactively gathering the information you need to not only decide whether further efforts are warranted, but also to help you put together a marketing plan that's efficient, cost-effective, and ideally is going to help you secure more deals. Defining what we mean by assessment is critical at this phase because throughout the technology transfer community, this word can have a variety of different meanings. Based on years of experience performing hundreds of market-based assessments for our clients, at Flintech, we have developed a very specific, in-depth process that enables us to evaluate a technology's commercial potential and identify key next steps for commercialization. As part of the Flintech approach, we feel it's essential to proactively gather this firsthand information so that you can understand market needs and trends, who is most likely to be interested in the technology, how to effectively position a technology if you do choose to market it, items that need to be addressed prior to marketing, and how much of your limited resources this technology warrants. Well, there are many different types of tools that are marketed to tech transfer professionals with promises of aiding in this commercialization process and evaluation. We feel there really is no substitute for the in-depth research. Although it certainly is more complex than a questionnaire or a checklist, Flintech's process ensures that you really do consider all of those important factors along the way. As a result, by the end of the market-based assessment, you should have a clear understanding of the technology's commercial potential and your next steps. At Flintech, we use the term assessment to describe just one part of our IP management service for our clients. Thus, if you choose to perform an assessment yourself, it's important to see it as part of the overall process leading to potential licensing. And the goal of this process is to identify the most promising technologies in your portfolio and then successfully secure licensing or partnership agreements. As we mentioned earlier, it really is tempting to skip this step, and one of the reasons is because it is quite time-consuming and requires quite a bit of effort. In fact, a market-based assessment typically takes about 10 times as long or an order of magnitude longer than a screening. And this is true even here at Flintech, where because we use industry experts, we can typically do the tasks more rapidly than a TTO professional that wears many hats, but it really does take more effort for us as well. But this investment pays off because it helps you uncover critical information to ensure that the technologies you choose to market are truly those with the highest potential, and that the marketing strategies that you develop are informed by firsthand information gathered about the market and potential licensees. As a result, your chances for licensing are much higher with an overall lower investment. We use this diagram to help clarify the difference between the initial two stages of our intellectual property portfolio management process. Remember, the goal of screening is to clear the decks of technologies with low commercial potential. Again, the more times you touch that technology, the more it costs you. So you want to get these technologies off to the side quickly. To do this, you rely on the opinion of one individual, typically someone with expertise in that technology area. They're going to perform a quick analysis to generally determine the commercial potential of the technology, which helps you prioritize the portfolio. In comparison, the market-based assessment is used to verify interest and help you develop a roadmap. It relies on direct feedback from industry experts, and it includes detailed analysis. As a result, at the end of an assessment, you have a specific recommendation for what type of marketing actions, if any, are warranted. And you also have detailed information about recommended next steps. Now that we've discussed why it's so important to perform this additional analysis prior to marketing, Dave is going to walk us through the specific steps of the process.
Thanks, Danielle. We have divided the process up into 4 critical components or stages of performing a market-based technology assessment. From the lower left to the upper right, in order they are, first of all, understanding the technology, then gaining a clear understanding of the market with the highest potential applications for the technology, then performing an in-depth analysis of the innovation in light of what you've learned about the market's needs, and then finalizing your conclusions. At the end of this market-based assessment process, what we have found is that a clear decision about what to do next should have surfaced based on the information you obtained in the stages along the way. During today's webinar, we're going to be spending the bulk of our time walking you through each of these stages in more detail, including key examples along the way. So first, let's make sure we understand the technology that we're going to be investing our time and effort in. We're going to be asking ourselves, what is this technology? Familiarizing ourselves with it if it's the first time we've been exposed to it. What are the key benefits? What are the most attractive and highest potential commercial applications? And what can we learn from the inventor to ground us in this technology so that we're prepared when we do our research and speak with industry experts in later stages of the process? Now, presuming a screening has already been performed, you should have a technology overview to refer to. We find that this is the best place to start when you're initially ramping up on a new technology. In our opinion, there are three important components of an effective technology overview, and you can see them in the diagram here. First is a description of the technology. I'll discuss that a bit more in a moment. A list of potential benefits that are market-oriented, and a list of potential applications or uses of the innovation. Now, before we move forward into each one of these areas, let's consider that the tech overview is the primary means of attracting subject matter experts to interviews so that you can gain their insights. So it's important that the tech overview be easy to understand without additional background materials, and that it's compelling for potential licensees. But in addition to subject matter experts, the tech overview is also likely to be used in other ways. For example, you may use it within your tech transfer office to enable other staff members to quickly understand the technology. And you may potentially use it on your website. We've found that the technology overview is text that can be used pretty much verbatim if you decide to post the technology online. So let's go into the tech overview in a bit more detail. First of all, for the description. And by the way, if no technology overview exists, or if you need to update the current tech overview, these are some pointers here on the slide that we recommend. First of all, be very clear and very concise. This may sound picky, but we find that 3 to 5 sentences is usually just about right. You really don't need much more than that. Secondly, it's good to assume that the reader isn't intimately familiar with the subject area. And they may know broadly about the area because it's going to be their industry that they're involved with, particularly if they're a subject matter expert. But it's important not to use jargon or acronyms without defining them. Within the technology description, we recommend that you focus on what the technology does, not how it works. And we do a very simple, straightforward approach where we start with this technology is ... and we just simply fill in a description of the technology. We also strongly recommend that the description be non-enabling. In other words, the description should not give details of how the technology works unless patent protection is already in place, and that's not always the case.
Dave, we've got a question that's come through that actually was right along the lines of that. One of the questions was, how do you protect the IP while you're working through an assessment in terms of giving a description or talking to experts? And one of the things that Dave just said here is really key. The first part is making sure that your technology description focuses on what that technology does, not how it works. So make sure that those proprietary details are not in your description. We'll talk a little bit more detail about how to do that as well with the expert interview, but keeping throughout the focus on what that technology does versus the details of how it works are critical if you don't have a patent in place.
Good point. I don't really think I have much to add to that. We'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. So in terms of potential benefits, you want to focus on how the technology is better, faster, or cheaper than the current state of the art. The benefits highlight why a prospective company would want to pursue licensing this technology. So the goal is to think about what's truly innovative, especially from a market perspective, not necessarily just from a science or engineering perspective. If you sit there and think about it for a while and you cannot clearly identify benefits that will matter to the market, you may have an invention that doesn't actually advance the state of the art in a way that will be meaningful to a potential licensee. If you run into this situation, and we certainly have run into this situation, you don't want to expend your limited resources marketing that technology. It also helps to keep in mind when you're focusing on these benefits, especially if you're drafting them, to keep in mind that most of the individuals in your target audience are very busy and won't have much time to spend on this technology, at least not initially until they're really interested in it. So to respect their time, be sure to spell out the key benefits as clearly and as concisely as possible. Here at Fuentech, we find that using a single key phrase or even a single word, and I'll show you some examples in just a moment, followed by a very short description, no more than a sentence, that works best. Let's move to the next slide, and then I'll give you a couple of examples. The final element of the technology overview is a list of potential applications. Now, it's good to start with input from the inventor if you have that, but you also need to step back and think outside the box for yourself. The goal here is to think about the problem that the innovation is trying to solve. Most technologies are developed to address a specific issue. Once you've identified that root problem the innovation was designed to address, ask yourself who else might have the same problem or a similar need. That helps you to understand other potential applications. Now that we've covered the components of a technology overview, let's take a look at a couple of examples. Now, this is a very busy slide, and we're not going to go through every line on this, but here we have an example of a technology overview that starts with a brief description. If you count, it's just 2 short paragraphs, and if you're really picky, it's just 5 sentences. It's really all that's needed. And as I mentioned before, it starts with, "This technology is," with the goal of being very clear and straightforward. Then in the middle section, we have a few key potential benefits. And you notice that we bold these words. They're just individual words for the benefits. That's not just to attract attention visually, but the words themselves are compelling to a potential expert. These are advantages that should make a difference in the marketplace. And then finally, we have several high potential applications. For the sake of time, I'll move on to the next example, but you can come back and look at this in more detail when you have your copy of the slides. In this second example, again, we start with a brief description of the technology, and the focus is on what the technology does rather than how it solves the problem at hand, as Danielle was describing in answer to the question earlier. In the next section, we have potential benefits, and then finally, we have the highest potential applications. Now, here in this example, it's important to note that these applications go beyond just what the inventor identified, and these applications have significant potential commercial interest. Now, as with the previous slide, I'll move on in the interest of time, but feel free to review these examples in more detail after the webinar.
Dave, I will make one comment here. We do have one other resource on this subject of the technology overview, and that's that webinar that I had mentioned earlier about the step-by-step process for screening. We go into great detail about how to write the technology overview and those key elements. So that is another tool that you can use, and it is available on our website.
Great, good point. So at this point, after you've reviewed the tech overview, we feel it's important to touch base with the inventor. The goal of an inventor interview is to ensure you have a solid grasp of the key aspects of the innovation that you will need during the remainder of the assessment process. So during the inventor interview, we recommend you focus on how this technology compares to the current state of the art, what problem was the inventor trying to solve, who else might have a similar problem who could benefit from this solution, what's the current state of development for this technology. Now, this is critical because if the innovation is at an early stage of development, either conceptual or maybe just an early prototype, it may not yet be ready for commercialization. Alternatively, a technology that has been fully developed and tested will be much more attractive to the market. And then before closing, we recommend that you ask the inventor for a high-level estimate of cost and timing to take the innovation from its current state of development forward to commercialization. You're looking for a ballpark here, an order of magnitude. And this will give you a helpful reference point for your discussions with subject matter experts in the following stages of the process. By the way, after the inventor interview, be sure to revise the tech overview based on any new information you may have learned. And now Danielle is going to walk us through the second phase of the assessment process.
Thanks, Dave. So once you understand the technology, it is time to consider it within the context of the applicable markets. But we're going to caution you again, slow down. Before you pick up that phone or move too quickly, you really want to do your homework. You want to be sure that you understand the market dynamics, the IP landscape, which companies on the value chain are most important, and you want to understand the industry opinions or their impressions of the technology. And to do this, you're certainly going to pick up the phone, but you'll do it in a very different context than you would if you were marketing the technology. It's a lot easier to start a relationship when you're approaching someone as an expert versus if you're trying to sell them something. And if you're lucky, They will actually be interested in the technology, and then you can smoothly move into the marketing phase without ever having to do that hard sell. To understand the market, there are several key factors that you need to consider. We'll start with market size at the top. You want to understand, is this a $1 million market or is it a $10 billion market? There's a big difference in how you'll approach it depending on the size. You also want to look at market growth and maturity. Is the market growing? So for example, apps for mobile devices. Or is it a market that's stable with no significant growth, or is it maybe even declining? In terms of market dynamics, are the players in the market early adopters, or are they very conservative when it comes to new technology? For the state of the art, you really want to understand how does this technology compare to what is already available. You also want to look for any hot industry issues. Have there been any events in recent months that make this a hot area? For example, during many of the recent natural disasters around the world, there was a strong need for technologies for communication and tracking, as well as those for things like portable shelters. So it's important to know about those events. You also want to learn a little bit about the key players. You want to know both about the number of players as well as specific names. Understanding how many potential licensees are out there will help you in your decision making for next steps. In some industries, there is domination by just a handful of players, while in others, it's very diversified or disparate and there are many, many small players. All of this information helps you not only determine the commercial potential for the technology, but it also helps you understand what is important to the market, which in turn feeds into how to position the technology and who to target if you do pursue marketing. There are just a couple of sources I'd like to highlight here that we use when we're looking at secondary information. Clearly, there are search engines, Google, Bing, a variety of them available. And this is a good, quick way to get free data. You can get a sense for the market very quickly. Press releases issued by market research companies are really a great resource. They often have the key trends summarized, even include market size numbers, as well as a list of company names that are key players in the market. You can also use subscription market research databases. So OneSource, Dialog, Profound are some examples. They are going to have some research reports as well as information about the individual companies. Industry association websites can also be good. When an industry is trying to market itself to others, they do so by providing a lot of really solid information, including industry trends or numeric values about trends in their industry. And finally, you can also look at major market research sites, BCC Research, Frost & Sullivan. These are places where you can buy reports. They also may have abstracts that include useful information that you can get without paying for the report. The second piece of the market research in terms of secondary research is to look at the IP landscape. And we very purposely include this piece as part of market research. It's very easy to become overly focused on patentability or novelty at this point. The goal is really to leverage information about the IP landscape to help you understand the market in terms of how many innovations are there in this area. Are there lots or are there just a few? It also helps you understand if the innovation in this space is broad or if it's really focused on one specific area. You can also get a sense for who is playing or innovating in this space. And these elements really help give insight into the level of innovation in the technology area, as well as generating a list of potential licensees. We have just a couple of hints and tips here that you can look through later, but we found that Free Patents Online has some great items in their help section. They have a very good tutorial. They have some syntax and search examples and tips. USPTO help section also has a few useful things that you can see here. So if you're new to doing IP search, these are great resources. Again, just remember that you're focusing on the information related to the market, not doing a novelty search. You can leave that piece to the lawyers. I'm now going to hand it over to Dave to talk a little bit more about the value chain and how we incorporate that.
Great. So the value chain, if you're not familiar with it, can be thought of as a series of levels, sort of starting from the bottom of this slide, moving up to the top, where you add value to raw materials and you transform them through various industry players into a product or service that an end user buys. So the way to think about the value chain is that it outlines the primary layers of the industry supply chain, but it also helps you think through how the technology will deliver added value to the industry. In addition, it enables you to identify which levels are the primary target market for the technology, and this helps you because these are the layers that will have the best prospective licensees. Finally, it's helpful in determining which experts to interview because you want to focus on reaching experts from the most important layers of the value chain. So let's say that you're looking at a given industry value chain that's been developed. You want to identify the target layer or layers, and you should ask yourself the following questions. Where is the invention most relevant? Which level would most likely drive adoption of the new technology? And which companies are most likely to be interested in licensing this technology? So here's a sample value chain. In this case, let's start with interviews. We could interview subject matter experts from all three of the middle levels of this value chain. So these are the service providers, companies that sell measurement instruments, and firms that manufacture flow sensors. We could find experts from any one of these sorts of companies and get value from those interviews. However, when it's time to identify specific potential licensees, for this industry, for this value chain, it's likely that we're only going to find potential licensees in the subcomponent or component layer, which in this case is the flow sensor instrument makers. And that's because they are most likely to influence adoption of the technology or have a viable interest in licensing. And again, this is going to vary from application to application, from market to market, depending on what your value chain is and your technology. Now that you've determined the layers of the value chain that you want to target for expert interviews, what should you focus on during the expert interviews? The information we look for here at Fuentech during expert interviews includes the following. I'm going to give you about a half dozen thoughts. First, how does this technology compare with the current state of the art? From a market perspective, how is this comparing to the current state of the art? Secondly, what's truly innovative? What does the expert view as key advantages of the innovation? Third, what would the technology need to do in order to be attractive to the market? What requirements would it need to meet? And this is an important question. It's not just hypothetical, because you can then map that set of requirements or needs back to what the technology is actually currently capable of achieving. Next, what applications and markets does the technology appear best suited to address? And ideally, you'd like to ask the expert, what are the size and growth trends for those markets and applications? Next, is there an interest in licensing on the part of the expert? So you're talking to someone, are they or do they think that their company would be interested in licensing? And finally, before you get off the phone with them, ask them who else they recommend you speak to get additional market perspective on the innovation you're discussing.
Dave, you covered some really key areas here that are very important. One of the things that I know new assessors often worry about is that experts will not be willing to share that sensitive data about market size or growth or sales with them. Can you comment on how you handle this?
Sure. The best way that I've found to address this is, first of all, reassure the expert that you are not looking for any confidential or proprietary information, and then turn the question around and ask the expert to give you just an order of magnitude and direction for the size and growth trends for a market. For example, is the market $10 million annually or $10 billion annually? Is it growing modestly, growing significantly, or is it flat or declining? And when they answer those questions at a ballpark level, that will still be very helpful information for you.
I'll also refer back to the question that was asked earlier about how do you do an assessment when you don't have a patent filed yet, and how do you protect that invention? When you're talking to experts, there are a couple of things that you can keep in mind. One, make sure that you talk to them about what the technology does and don't get into the details of how it works. And you'll often find that experts do want to ask you questions about the details of the technology. Typically, you can kind of turn it around and say, well, tell me a little bit more about what your requirements would be. Or if you have a technology that has this capability, what sort of specifications would you require? And that way you can still get information from them without revealing too much information. The other thing you can do is tell them that, as a follow-up to this conversation, you could put a non-disclosure agreement in place, or once the patent application has been published, then you'll get back to them. There are a couple of different steps in this process of communication that you can use, but it really is possible to have a valuable expert interview without revealing details of the technology.
Yeah, I would concur with those ideas, and that sounds valuable. So moving on to the next slide, we talked about where you find these experts in terms of the layer in the value chain. We talked about what you want to cover during the expert interviews, but let's be even more specific. How can you identify specific individuals, real human beings, to interview? On this slide, we've listed 4 key attributes of a productive subject matter expert, and I won't list those for you. We think they're relatively self-evident. And in addition, on this slide, you can see some examples of specific positions or roles that we have found most often result in effective expert interviews. Now, as Danielle has mentioned, here at Fuentech, we have a team that includes researchers with years of experience, and they are very efficient at identifying these individuals and obtaining their contact information, which of course you need to set up an interview. But let's say that you're on your own and you're trying to find subject matter experts. Here are a couple of helpful hints that we would recommend to you. First of all, go to the company website of a company in the particular layer of the value chain you're looking at and look in the About Us section of that company website. Often individuals are listed there. Secondly, refer to annual reports, which almost always include a listing of the executive management team. And then thirdly, visit industry association websites for the applicable industry, focusing especially on individuals who may have recently published papers or written articles. These are individuals who are likely to have a good grasp of the current state of that industry. And now Danielle will take us through the third stage of the assessment process.
Thanks, Dave. So now you've understood that you understand the market and the technology. It's time to use this valuable data to analyze the commercial potential of the technology. It's also important to consider the potential ROI for commercialization, as well as potential licensees that should be targeted during marketing. After you've done all of your homework, you should have a pretty good gut feel for the commercialization potential of this technology already. As a result, at Fuentech, we find you can consider just a few key factors in your final analysis, and it should be pretty easy to come up with these ratings because of all of the research that you've done. If you rate all of these key factors and they're relatively strong, if you lay them out visually like we have here, it should be pretty easy to tell if the technology has good commercial potential or not. Conversely, if all of the dots line up on the weak side, or the left in this picture, it's pretty clear that the commercial potential is low. At Fuentech, we feel that these factors fall into three key groups. The first group we look at is commercialization. First, we look at technology maturity. Is the technology still at concept phase, which would put it on the weak or the left side of this diagram, or does it have a prototype available, maybe even with test data, which would put it on the strong end? In terms of technology status, is the project stagnant and lacking funding, or is there really ongoing development that's well funded? In terms of ease of adoption, is there a lot of work to be done to get a commercial product, or is the path to producing a finished good pretty clear? We also look at the IP factors. So the first one, is the IP protected? Clearly, if the intellectual property has been disclosed without protection, the IP status would be weak. However, if a patent has been granted, it's strong. For IP potential, is the protection available only within the US, or is international protection also available? For IP density, is this technology one of many similar technologies, or is it in an area of growing innovation? And finally, we look at the market factors. Is the market small and stagnant, or is it large with strong growth? Is the market resistant to new technologies, or are players seeking novel innovation? Can this technology be applied to only one area or across many industries? And finally, is this technology more of a finished good with limited alternatives for adding additional value, or does the technology fall low on the value chain such that it can be used as a component in a large variety of applications? We'll take a look at a couple of examples so you can see how clear the commercialization potential becomes when you consider only these key variables and lay them out. So as you can see here, with a minimal number of factors, you can quickly assess commercial potential visually. The difference between the technology with strong commercial potential on the left is quite easy to differentiate from that of the technology on the right, which has weaker potential. It is quite possible and even common that not all of the factors are either all high or all low. But as you can see in these diagrams, you can get a pretty good sense of the overall picture, which helps you make a decision about whether technology warrants further resources for commercialization. Let's look at this strong example on the left first. You can see here that the range of applicability is actually rated fairly low. It's likely that for this technology, it could only be used in maybe one or two application areas. But if you look at the market size and growth, you can see that these factors are fairly strong. So even though applicability may be limited, it is at least limited to very strong markets, and thus the overall commercial potential is still rated high. Now looking at the low example on the right, you can see that market size and growth, as well as range of applicability, are actually high for this example. However, if you look up at the commercialization factors and the IP factors, you can see that those are actually fairly low. So because this technology is relatively weak overall, there's very little chance that anyone in the market is going to have interest in the technology. Therefore, even though the markets are large, the probability of licensing success is low, and therefore further resources just really aren't warranted. As we stated before, regardless of what type of checklist or tool you're using, it's critical that you do your homework so that you can look at these factors and have very strong answers for them to understanding whether it's a weak or a strong factor. Once you've done this homework, you really don't need to walk through an exhaustive list of factors. The critical elements shown here really should suffice. Once you've considered the commercial potential, it's important to consider the expected return on investment if you do pursue commercialization. This information will guide your decision about how much of your valuable resources you should expend on this particular technology. The first piece to look at is the entire market for the technology. And this should be for the particular technology, not the broader market. So if you look at the flow control valve example that Dave just covered, you should look at the market for flow control valves, not the entire valve market. Next, you want to consider the portion of the market that you believe your technology might capture. If there are already hundreds of products in the marketplace, yours will not garner 95% market share. So you really have to be realistic about what portion of the market you can capture. Next, look at how much of the sellable product your technology impacts. Again, in the case of the valve, your innovation really is the entire product, or at least close to all of it. But if your technology is an actuator or a switch or some other component, it's likely to be just a small portion, maybe even 5% of the final product. So it's important to consider how much of that final product your technology actually impacts. And then finally, you want to consider the royalty rate that you think you might be able to expect. Your expected return must be considered when you try to decide the appropriate next steps for a technology. For example, if the expected return is only, say, $10,000 for a technology, it doesn't make any sense to spend $50,000 on your marketing effort. Now that you've done the groundwork on everything we've reviewed so far, a list of potential licensees should also emerge. Typically come from 3 sources throughout the assessment process. So the first is the expert interviews. Anyone who expressed interest in your technology during your interviews is a potential licensee. And the best part is they're warm leads. And so it's easy to move gently into those licensing discussions very smoothly. Your IP search can also help you find assignees of related patents and applications, and these companies are also potential licensees. And finally, your market research should have also revealed key firms in industry that may be interested in the technology. So now that you've completed your analysis, you're ready to make your recommendation. And this is really the culmination of all your efforts. And I'll let Dave cover this phase of the process.
Thanks, Danielle. Well, at this point, you should have everything you need to complete your market-based assessment. And as you'll see in our remaining few slides, the goals are to make a clear recommendation and provide actionable next steps. As you consider your recommendation, at a high level, there are 3 options, and we're going to use this diagram that you've seen before to highlight them. One of the options is to move forward to actively market the technology. Another choice is to passively market the technology, such as posting it on your website for a potential licensee to discover. Third, in some cases, it may be best to release the technology and make no further investment of time or effort. The action you recommend should be based primarily on the potential the technology has to secure a license in the marketplace. Here at Fuentech, we take a more granular approach. Rather than just 3 options, we have at least 5 potential recommendations, plus a few more that aren't listed on this slide for unique situations that don't happen that often. So starting at the top of the slide, technologies that enjoy clear market interest and they are ready to commercialize, these make the most sense to actively market. But as Danielle just pointed out on the slide about ROI, even with high potential innovations, you still need to determine the level of resources to be invested. For example, if the technology only applies to a narrow market, targeted marketing is probably best. Moving down the list, some innovations are of clear interest to the market, but the technology itself needs further development before it's going to meet the requirements that the market experts told you the industry expects or requires. Moving down the list, some innovations are ready to move towards commercialization, but the market isn't necessarily ready yet. This would be an example of an industry that isn't yet mature enough to warrant your marketing investment. And we've seen this in some cases where an industry is still in the early stages of development. In cases like this, we recommend monitoring the marketplace for a defined period of time, choose 6, 9, 12 months, something of that order of magnitude, and then come back and look and see if it's time to market the technology. Lower down the commercial potential scale, some technologies are only of limited interest to the market, or if the market niche is extremely small, and in these cases, an investment in active marketing simply isn't justified. In these cases, we normally recommend passive marketing. This is true especially if you already have patent protection for the innovation. Finally, after this thorough market-based assessment process, we have found that some technologies really need to be released. They have such low commercial potential that they don't really even warrant passive marketing, but typically this would be technologies with no patent protection. Let's take a moment to look specifically at the executive summary and why it's so important. Now let's think about the people first who will approve your recommendation. Well, most of us, I'm sure you, like yourselves today, you're short on time. In our experience, at this stage, when you have the entire report for the market-based assessment ready to present, at this stage we've seen that some of these folks in your sort of key audience may not take the time to read the entire document because they're so busy. Now, in some cases, this is because they want to quickly scan to determine your recommendation. Did you recommend passive marketing or release? If they learn that your recommendation is to actively market it, then they're more likely to slow down, read other sections, and confirm for themselves the impetus, the rationale for investing in marketing. So if this is the only section they read, then the executive summary, in my view, in our view, suddenly becomes possibly the most critical element of all your hard work this far in the process. To be most impactful, we recommend that the executive summary delivers your recommendation up front. What are you recommending be done with this technology based on its licensing potential? Before we leave this slide, let me comment that here at Fuentech, we feel strongly the executive summary should provide a clear synopsis of the assessment without needing to read the entire report, whether the reader chooses to or not. That means that the executive summary should summarize the most important findings from your interviews and market research. The exec summary should include the critical requirements the market expects to be met. It's written only from the market's viewpoint, not from the opinion. For example, if I'm writing it, not from my opinion as the assessor. It should read logically and flow well. It's not just a stream of consciousness about a bunch of facts you learned. And it concludes with a list of actionable next steps that support and are in line with your recommendation. That way the reader knows here's what you recommend and here's what the next steps should be if they concur with your recommendation. So if your recommendation is to pursue some level of marketing, this in-depth market-based assessment process we've taken you through should have you positioned very well to move forward. And specifically, that moving forward that will take place after this would be to develop an effective and efficient marketing plan. And you'll know how big an opportunity this is. You'll have an understanding for what the market expects or requires of the technology in order to be successful. You'll understand what, if any, further testing or development is required. And the good news is you will have identified some potential licensees. Normally, we find that you have at least a couple of warm leads to follow up based on your expert interviews. With this information in hand, you can build a cost-effective targeted marketing plan. And as you'll see in the lower right corner of the slide, our next webinar just happens coincidentally to be on that particular subject. So as a result, we'd love to have you join us next spring for our webinar on proactive technology marketing strategies in April of 2012. Danielle, any comments at this point?
Dave, that's been great. I really appreciate your comments. This is a time when we can open it up to more questions from the audience. We have gotten one, and I'm not sure I'll answer it exactly right, so if it needs more clarification, please send me another message. But it was talking more about the IP factors when we're considering them in terms of our analysis. And, you know, IP can be sort of a murky land. You really just want to get a general sense for what is the IP potential for a technology. So, you know, there's the end all the way to the left on the weak side, which is if a technology has been disclosed already without being protected and your stat bar has already expired, that's pretty much a red flag that you've got an issue, at least for probably licensing that technology. It's possible you can still find partners and, you know, get a win in terms of getting the technology out there, but licensing may be in jeopardy. On the other end, you already have a PCT or a U.S. patent that's been granted, and so you have very strong IP protection. You can reveal all of the details of the technology to the potential licensee, and so that's very strong. In the middle, you're going to have where you have applied for a patent, or maybe you have a provisional patent in place. So you've gone through some of the steps and already expended some of those resources, so you fall right in the middle there. Some of the other things, if you're considering using this process for really finding partners, so you aren't pursuing a patent for a technology, but you do want to have others using your technology and you want to determine how you can get it out into the market, you can really use the same process, but clearly the IP analysis area would not factor into your overall analysis. So hopefully that helped answer the question a little bit. Again, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat section of your WebEx screen. Dave, one of the things that I know that other assessors or people who are starting to assess ask is, how many experts do you recommend that we speak with? Do you have any suggestions for that?
That's a good question. So ideally, as you're going in, it's great if you have identified 5 or 6 high potential experts you'd like to talk to, but candidly, you're going to need a little bit larger list because they may not necessarily be available on your time frame, and sometimes they may choose not to participate in the process. But you don't necessarily need to just think of it as, I have a goal and I'm trying to check a box on a checklist and okay, I got my 5 or 6 interviews and now I'm good to go. It's really more a question of, as you have these expert interviews, where are the arrows pointing? Are you getting consistent feedback, or are you getting inconsistent feedback? And in some cases, after we have had as few as 3 expert interviews, if all the arrows are pointing in the same direction, if the information that we are gaining from these experts is generally aligning, then it may not be necessary to go all the way to 5 or 6 interviews simply to confirm something that you already have a pretty good trajectory on. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I would agree. Ideally, if you're getting pretty good feedback, you want to make sure, well, either way, if you're getting consistent feedback, make sure you interview at least 3 people to make sure that it's not just your own opinion, but it is that of the market. But typically that 4, 5, 6 range is really where you can feel comfortable that you've talked to enough people and you understand the consistency of their statements. The other value in talking to multiple people, rather than just talking to 1 or 2, is that they are going to give you interesting information about what the market requires or what is important to their specific company. And that can be really valuable as you're putting together your marketing materials. The other aspect is the one we talked about earlier, where it's much easier to approach somebody as an expert than to knock on their door with a cold call. So the more people that you call, within reason as part of your assessment, that can also help build your success for marketing as well.
That's right, and I'll add one other thing. Ideally, what you'd love to have is a healthy response from the individuals you're targeting, and then to have positive response about the innovation and that move forward towards potential licensing. But at the other end of the spectrum, it's important to note, if you send out a lot of invitations for people to participate in an interview and very few do, or they simply send back a cursory email saying, sorry, we're not interested in this time, and that becomes a trend, that alone could be telling you something about your innovation. And if let's say you finally get hold of a couple of experts and the first few don't seem that interested in it, that may be a good time to step back and see what this is telling you at this point about the innovation.
That's a really good point. It's sometimes hard to figure out where that fine line is between people being busy and that's why they're not willing to speak with you, compared to they're not interested in your technology. In the first case of trying to get a hold of industry experts who may be busy, email is a great way to make your first contact, and then picking up the phone to follow that can also be very useful. In terms of speaking during your interview and engaging them, it can also be helpful to offer them a carrot. So make sure that they know that if this technology does move on to marketing and commercialization, they will be among the first to know, so that they have the opportunity to express their interest in it and pursue licensing if they are interested. But as Dave said, if you've pounded on lots of doors, sent out lots of emails, and made some phone calls, and you're not having very many people willing to talk to you, that can be a very strong indicator about the value of your technology to the market. So at this time, I don't see any further questions from the group. I would like to thank you all for attending today. Hopefully you found this valuable. We have a number of resources available on our website as well, so www.fuentech.com. And we hope you'll consider joining us for our next webinar this spring. Thank you very much for attending, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.